Hello, Year 8. Hope you're all okay. So you should have already completed the first lesson of home learning on digestion and nutrients that your teachers will have uploaded on Teams. This is carrying on with the theme of digestion, but we are going to move on to look at food tests. So we're going to look at how we can test for different nutrients in food. So to begin with, we're going to start with the Do Now Connect activity as always. Then we're going to start making notes on the different types of food tests we can do. You don't need to carry out those experiments, you just need to understand how we do them, okay, and make a couple of notes. You're also going to complete risk assessments for those experiments. We'll go through how you do that as we work through today's lesson. To finish off today's lesson, you are going to have an apply task to do. Now, your apply task is going to be a series of questions based on everything you'll have covered in the lesson. That is what you need to submit to your teacher along with the risk assessments you've produced. Okay, so you will have a separate Do Now sheet for you in your Teams file for you to fill in the different food group and nutrients for each food in the list on that sheet. So I want you to have a go at doing that. There's a few images on the slide to help you. For some of you that will be quite easy and you'll get it done quite quickly. If that's the case, then I want you to have a go at doing the challenge task. So for a challenge task, I want you to answer the question, can you think of any jobs where understanding nutrition is important? There are plenty. There's so many answers you can give for that, so think of as many as you can. So some of you might be thinking, why are we learning about food tests? Why is this important? There's a few questions really to think about. Firstly, how do we know what nutrients are in our different foods? So we all looked at food labels last lesson. How do we know that that's what's in those foods? Okay, and who might be doing that job? So those questions will lead quite nicely on to why is it important. I'd like you to have a think about that. And then you should see, if you click through the PowerPoint, there are some answers for this, okay? Why is it important that we know what's in our food? Can you just jot down a few notes for me here? They don't need to be massive detail, but it'll help you as we go through the lesson. Now we know why it's important that we are able to test for different nutrients in food, we need to start looking at some of the different food tests we can do. Now it's important that you do not need to do any of these experiments, you just need to read through the method, understand how it works, and think about how we can keep safe, because that's going to help you complete your risk assessments to submit to your teacher. Okay, so the first test we're looking at is a test for starch. Can you just read through this now, make sure you're happy with the method and think about what sort of things we need to be aware of to make sure that we can keep ourselves safe if we were to carry out this practical. Okay, so I've given you a few ideas about some of the things we'll need to do to make sure we keep safe, okay? We should all know that we don't eat food in the lab and we must wear safety glasses when doing a practical, but there are a few other things that you need to think about. For example, if you are using glass when it breaks, what do you need to do? If there are spillages, what do you need to do? Okay, it's important that you look at the specific chemicals involved in this food test and what potential hazards they might have, so you know how to make sure that you are safe. I'd like you to use what I've given you and obviously go back and look through the method if you need to complete the risk assessment using the table that we've provided. Fill in any hazards. Make sure that you describe what harm that hazard could cause and any measures that you think we could put in place to stop it from happening. Can you do that for me now? You can either complete the risk assessment on the template. If you save a copy and download it, you should be able to. If not, if you want to do it on paper, that's fine. Just make sure that you have got the same kind of layout set up so that we can see exactly what we're talking about. So we're moving on now then, and we're going to look at the test for sugar. So this one's a slightly shorter method. Again, we are not carrying out this practical. You just need to read through the method, make sure you're happy with exactly what we're doing, and consider any potential hazards or risks that we might need to think about to make sure that we can keep safe. Again, I've given you a list of some of the things to think about. So for example, in this one, we've got the added concern about the boiling water. So we need to make sure that we're careful with how we heat it, what we're doing with it, make sure that we are safe. We've also got slightly different chemicals that we need to consider and their potential hazards. So I want you to do the same as you've done for the first test. I want you to produce a new risk assessment using that template provided, go through what the hazards are, what harm they could cause, and any safety measures that you can think of to stop that from happening. Moving on again, this is the test for lipids. So this is the third food test we're going to look at. I'd like you to go through the method, make sure that you're happy with what we're going to be doing. If we were to do this practical, make note of some of the chemicals we might be using. So I've already noticed that I can see ethanol in step 2. Okay, it's important that we know any potential hazards for the chemicals we use. Have a think about how we could keep safe doing this practical, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to create our own risk assessment for this practical. As I said on the previous slide, we are going to do a risk assessment for the lipids practical as well. So I've given you a couple of ideas, again, of things we might need to be mindful of. So I mentioned ethanol in the previous slide. I've got on the slide here that alcohol is highly flammable and harmful, so we must be really careful when we're using it. You don't want to get it near a flame. I'd like you to use this information, plus any thoughts you've had about the method as you've read through it, to again fill out that risk assessment template. Make sure you've described what the hazards are, the harm they could cause, and your safety measures to prevent that harm from happening. Okay, so this is our final food test then. This is a test for protein. So what I'd like you to do, same as before, is go through, read very carefully the method. There's some different chemicals in this method again. So make sure you're thinking all the way through, how can we keep safe? What hazards am I coming across as I read through this method? Again, I've seen sodium hydroxide, which is another different chemical. So we need to be making sure that if it is harmful, we know what the risk is, and then make sure that we are thinking about how we can minimize this risk. As with the other food tests, I've given you some key things to think about when we're thinking about how we can keep safe. I'd like you to do the same as before and complete your risk assessment template for this food test. So make sure that you are identifying any hazards, you're describing the harm the hazard could cause, and any measures you can think of to help stop that from happening. Okay, so this is your apply task, which is your final task for today's lesson. It is going through the results of food tests. It is talking about some of what you've learned as you've gone through the different methods. So what I'd like you to do is answer the questions on a separate Word document, or if you need to, you can write it on paper. Make sure you're flicking back if you're unsure to your notes and go back through the slides if needs be. You can always pause to answer these questions. Answer them in as much detail as you can, and make sure you are answering them in full sentences, please. If you get stuck for question 4, there is a support sheet to help you plan and write your answer. So if you need that, you just need to go and access it separately. It's attached to this assignment. This will need to be submitted to your teacher alongside your risk assessments that you produce for the food test as we've gone through the lesson. If you get this done and you want a bit of extra challenge, which some of you may well need, then I'd like you to have a go at the challenge task at the bottom. So I'd like you to suggest at least 2 types of people who would need to know this type of nutritional information. Explain what these people need to be aware of. Okay, we started talking about this at the beginning of the lesson, so you can always go back, look at your notes, look at the slides if you need to.